Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Fabric Developers. I'm still trying to get used to the name, actually, keep on trying to say database. But we are Fabric Developers now, very exciting. And got the website all running. We've shared that last time. And at the moment, there's just so much happening in Fabric. We have, we're trying to cover as much of the different topics as we can. We were up to the event hubs. But I saw I actually saw MJ, you posted something on LinkedIn yesterday or earlier about DP-700.
Mm,
It's the new exam. We both sat for DP-600, where it's about the fabric, the first fabric exam. And so I'm quite curious about what DP-700 is about. How does it differ to DP-600? And since you are now kind of preparing for it, so what a good time to actually talk about.
yeah. Yes. Well, thank you very much, David. Yeah, like again, so many things happening in Fabric at the moment. I think every week is like there's always new happening in Fabric. One particular one is that they recently had the Fabric conference in Europe. Again, waiting for that thing to happen as maybe in Singapore at least or here in Australia, right? Um, yeah, we can wish, right? Yeah,
Next
so
year.
that was kind of like the highlight for the past week, and everyone's headspace onto that. Now, DP-700. Okay, so I've been in the know of this exam for a while as well. But like just on the background, right? I know it's coming. I know it wasn't even called DP-700 back then. But the idea was that yeah, like it's another certification exam with Fabric. Because the thing is, if you look at Fabric, like Fabric is not just Power BI, right? And it's not just Spark, and it's not just this. Now there's also a Purview component. There's also a real-time intelligence component, and so on and so forth, right? Like, and as much as we wanna put it in a point of view that Fabric is a unified platform with multiple personas for like engineers, architects, analysts, data science, and so on and so forth. But the thing is, right? Like, it's when you're getting started and you're trying to understand or learn a specific topic, it still really helps if you can be guided on certain kind of like criteria, right? Um, and in particular with Fabric, right? Like DP-600, the reason why I didn't take that up very early on is that it's very heavy on Power BI stuff. It's like introducing Fabric on the Power BI point of view, and there's a lot of concepts around DAX, data flows, and XML, and all those things that I'm not super familiar with. I mean, I know them in principle, but I don't use that every day, right? So that's why I still took the DP-600 exam. I think like a couple of weeks ago, right? Um, yeah, and then I might still manage to pass it without doing any review. Yeah, so that was nice. Now. For those who don't know, there's also separate certification, which is the Azure Data Engineering. Let me quickly just Google that.
I think that one is that gone or is that still
Yeah,
valid?
it's still yeah, it's DP-203, right? So it's
Oh, okay.
DP-203. Okay, so now Azure Data Engineering. I also took that last year, by the way.
Yeah.
So and I passed it. It's very specific to data engineering on the point of view of Azure. So that's where Azure Synapse Analytics is
Yeah.
kind of like a hard topic in there. Same goes with Azure Databricks, right? It's also in that space, as well as like Azure Data Factory. So those are like kind of like the focus
Mhm.
of that exam, right? Although this exam DP-203 is also an intermediate exam, right? A lot of the questions would be around on a platform point of view, right?
Yep.
It's kind of like a 70% platform, 30% data engineering. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So that means that you need to know how certain buttons work, how certain this work, right? Um, all right. Now that's why I came from that background, right? Like, I mean, I came to Fabric with that kind of like background, coming from like a platform point of view, a DP-203 passer, right? That's why when I took the uh, yeah, now I got confused. The
DP
DP
600.
600,
Yep.
right? That's why I am having hesitations around that because again, it's very close to I think the Power BI exam, right? Um, all right, now DP 700. Now with DP-700, let me just share my screen real quick. Okay. By the way, a lot of these are in beta. It's literally just been announced. You can will be available on October 22. That's when you can actually start taking the exam. I scheduled it literally just I think if not 22 to 23rd, right? Like I think it's 23rd in Australia or something. Um,
Yep.
and like basically the core focus of this exam is more around data engineering, which is ingesting and transforming data, securing and managing analytic solutions, and monitoring and optimizing analytic solutions.
Mm.
So the key part here, which I'm really liking, is that there will be it's a bit heavier now on SQL and PySpark, which I really like. I think I didn't feel that much PySpark love during the DB-600 exam. And now also KQL, right, which is for real-time intelligence. You use KQL. Um, yeah, so there's the study guide is here, and it's beta, right? So like it's still in beta at the moment. But you would see that again, it's divided into that three main section. And if you're a data engineer, like coming from again the DP-203 background, like Databricks or Synapse, this is like the right, you know, right exam for you, right? And if you're entering Fabric, um, like, and these are kind of like some of the specifics around configuring the workspace. And again, this is that part wherein you're working with Fabric and you're not working with Databricks or Synapse, right? So you need to understand these different settings, like concept of domains, One Lake, Spark, and things like probably understanding the concept of hub and spoke model and like concept of data mesh and things like that. Same goes with this one, version control. So there's Git aspect of Fabric when it supports Azure DevOps and Git, and like you probably need to know that there in DevOps you can use the Entra ID, and then for Git you need to use a PAT or personal access token, right? Um, then this is that governance aspect I was talking about earlier, wherein like this is now a mix of purview and like yeah, there's a purview component in the exam. Um, and row level security, and these are kind of like they're already in Power BI anyway, right? And warehousing in particular. But I think a lot of these are kind of like purview-ish questions. And then this is around orchestrating process. This is where you gotta choose between pipeline on a notebook or file upload, and then that's where the topic around V order will be kind of like you know touch base as well. Schedules, event-based triggers, yeah, dynamic expressions and stuff like that. Again, this is that part that if you're already good at data factory, you would know this by heart, right? And notebooks as well. Now this is that part where okay, now you're gonna do CDC, that's incremental data load, then doing dimensional modeling, and loading pattern for streaming data, right? So again, that's kind of like a concept of like tumbling windows and things like that. And then this is now heavy on PySpark and T-SQL and like the real meat of data engineering, right? Ingesting and transforming. And then there's a specific section here that's kind of like really what makes it different from the DP-600. It's more around the streaming data. So there's really good love on streaming data, like whether you're doing it by event houses or Spark, or event streams, right? Like there's different ways of doing it. And I'm pretty sure they'll be asking some trick questions on like, do you want to use KQL or Spark, and so on. And like, if you do it in Spark, then how do you do it? How do you batch them and things like that. I'm waiting for those questions. I'm pretty sure there will be questions around that. Um, and this is more just monitoring, right? Like this is that part where you're going to use the capacity metrics app, you're gonna use the monitor app. Then you probably need to understand that what's the retention policy of those logs. I believe it's just 90 days at the moment. But yeah, those are the things you can just go into the learn document, right? Once the exam
Yep.
is in there, right? Um, and like optimize the pipeline. And I think that's it, right? Like you this is like a real love for data engineering, right?
Mm.
So it's not about reporting in Power BI. DAX, no DAX here, I think.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
DP-600 was, let's just check the title for DP-600 again. It's the analytics engineer, um, the certification for that, and this one is the data engineer. And yeah, the main, I guess the main difference is one, they both kind of cover a lot of similar topics, but the emphasis for DP-600 is more around the like building the report.
correct.
The data is
Modeling.
already, yeah, the
Mm,
data is already in Fabric, so it's just connecting to it and visualize them, or process them, transform them a little bit before visualizing it. Whereas this one, DP-700, this is more about the, one step back, right? Okay, we need to get the data, into Fabric, so we need to understand the key like fundamental like data storage, one
Mm.
leg, the monitoring, etc. So right, okay. Well, thanks for that. That's
Yeah,
interesting. It makes sense as well because Fabric is so broad. To have
yeah,
one
exactly.
certification for everything Fabric will be quite overwhelming. So it kind of makes
Yeah.
sense to actually break it down as well.
Yeah, exactly. And although at the moment there's no Microsoft Learn, like self-paced path in there
Yeah,
already, but
yeah.
yeah, like I've already did an instructor-led training of this and that's why I'm very familiar with the material already. It's more around
Mm,
modern data engineering, right, with Fabric. So if you look at things like Scalable and things like that, like you would already see certain materials as trainers, right? Like you get that, oh, this is where it's going, right, and so on.
yeah,
So I those
yeah,
are like good signals for this. But I
yeah.
think this is really
Interesting.
good take so that although there's no, although again there's still a divide between an data engineer and analysts, right? But still, I think for someone who can do both, then you take both of the exam, right? But then if you want to be more focused on one than the other, because like for example, in bigger organizations, you can't be just that one person catering 75 data products, right? You gotta focus on certain
Yeah,
aspects.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Good.
yeah, again, I'm very, very excited for this exam. Yeah, and it's one of those exams that again, I don't probably want to take so much time of reviewing because you and I, we know Fabric from the heart, at least at least I feel I do. But yeah, like I'm just very excited for this because I've been waiting and waiting for this exam for a while now.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I mean, there's still a lot of trick questions in there that like sometimes it's so specific, right? You just wouldn't. The platform is so broad, and even though we use it for specific things, sometimes it's just like things out there that you haven't heard of. There might be a particular notebook function that like does certain things like that. So it can be tricky as well. So yeah, we'll definitely be looking forward to
yeah, and I'm
when it's ready.
yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, like there will be trick questions out there. Case studies, absolutely. Maybe I'm already thinking a case study around streaming is one, or
Mm,
like there will be a lot of questions around shortcuts as well. Like maybe a snowflake,
yeah,
iceberg table, and things
right,
like you know,
cool.
when to ingest, when to copy, when to not copy, right? Um,
Yeah. So for our audience, I guess like you've done a lot of exams, like much more than I have. What do you think like the exams are good for? How does it help you from your career or consulting perspective? Like, do you want to share a little bit sort
Yeah,
on that? I think that'd be
absolutely,
quite
right?
yeah.
I think there are two rationale around that, right? Like, so where probably before Microsoft Learn and before where Microsoft is right now, right? Certifications really had a kind of like a mixed bad rep, right? Like especially in the past, like oh, you just memorize things and then you pass the exam, right? And things like
Yeah,
that. Um, and I think if you take it that way, one, it doesn't really help you, and like you've just wasted time doing it. Second is that it doesn't really gear you towards a specific outcome, right? Like for me, the reason why I'm taking these exams is one because I'm a trainer, so I kind of like need to be in the know, right? So there's
yeah,
that aspect of like I need to pass this. It builds credibility.
yeah,
Second is as a consultant as well. Now being a thought leader in fabric space, like there's that baggage that yeah, hey, you need to be passing this, right?
yeah,
But besides that, right? Like let's say what makes it different from this versus let's say I'll just take a random AWS networking exam, which I have no idea right at the moment.
hmm
Like that doesn't really align to what I want to do in the like short term future, right? So I think these exams are really good as kind of like a measure of knowing at least the bare minimum to that thing, right? Like in this case, like in Fabric, for example, right? Like obviously, your experience with Fabric would mean a lot versus just taking an exam, right? But at the same time, Fabric is new, right? Like who has 10 years of experience with Fabric? No one, right?
Or people will probably in the job description, like when you look for jobs, the job ask will probably ask for like 5 year experience in Fabric.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
And that's why, these exams are good so that it kind of like differentiates you, for many reasons, right? Like one, you have the actual perseverance as a person, right? Like
Yeah,
you're willing to take in the challenge, right? Like
yeah,
that speaks one thing, and that probably speaks with the whole academe and like why do I have to go to uni, blah blah. It's more around the measure of commitment, right? Like that
sure, sure.
you're willing to commit, right?
Yeah.
Second is more around like a knowledge test, right? Like and like obviously in the real world like you won't be looking at this and like oh question 75 like you won't be memorizing that in the real world,
Mm,
right? But it's more around like when you're in a certain situation when certain like let's say as a consultant, right, like certain problems arise from this organization and like they're looking for help and stuff like that. Yeah, that's where how our brain works, right? Like we can always correlate with things that we've read, we've watched, we've
mm,
done in the past, right? And then that gives you a really good informed opinion about things. A real world example for this in Fabric I just had a couple of weeks ago with one of the chief data officers would be they want a capability to track changes of a source. Like for example, if that Oracle database changes their schema, we need to make sure that the reports doesn't crash, right? And things like that. And
mm.
like okay, so then that's why concepts like medallion architecture is robust because it gives you stages of things that you don't just get a Power BI report attached to an Oracle database, right? And things break on the fly, right?
Yeah,
So yeah,
I
that's why
agree.
this exams kind of like gives you perspectives, gives you knowledge, so that when you're in the real world as well, right? Like you have the base understanding of things, right? And it's kind of like quantifiable measure as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I'll just add to like from a hiring manager perspective. Like I've been in a few situations where like in the early days, I sat for the Power BI exam. I got the certification for that, and it didn't really reflect too much during the interview process. It was just asking technical questions, but when I was kind of introduced to the team, like, hey, we've got a certified Power BI expert, and so the hiring manager is saying that, hey, look, I have somebody who's an expert in the area, and the proof of that is that certification. And I think for the consulting world, it's even more direct, right? Because for consultancy to remain in, like, let's say, Microsoft,
Oh,
solution
partner, yeah,
provider
yeah, yes,
partner,
absolutely.
they need people to have certifications. That's one of their requirements for Microsoft to give them like silver or gold partnership. They need to maintain like a minimum number of certification as well. So depending on the person's choice, if you want to go down the like consultancy tech consultants path, yeah, having certificate definitely is a big tick. But even if you go down to a normal commercial organization, the hiring manager will still appreciate that as well. So yeah, definitely. And I think I was also mentioning before that at work we do certain things in a certain way, but sitting for the exam does kind of broaden the horizon a fair bit because it forces you to kind of learn everything. So I think it's just a great kind of a learning experience with real rewards at the end as
Yes,
well.
exactly.
So
And I think, that just goes to anything, right? Like, what's the point of taking the exam if you're not invested to it in the first place, right? Or at least it's not aligned to your objectives. So, yeah, like, don't take the
yeah,
exam. Don't do MBA if it's not aligned to you being a business person, right? Like, like, don't pursue that PhD just because of the doctor title, right? Like, if it's not aligned to your interests or, your current situation, right? So, yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah,
think it broadens up really in any choice we do in life, right? Like why pursue something if it's doesn't make sense, right? So for me,
yeah.
exam is really good because it's kind of like a measure of knowledge. It's a measure of yeah, it's kind of like in a way it's a way to check your progression as well with your career, with with life and so on.
And the other thing you mentioned is the Microsoft Learning, the self-paced learning thing. I actually really like what they've done over there as well.
Mm.
So
They made
I
it not so gated anymore, right? Like back then, it's very gated and like, oh, the only way to pass the exam is you first need to go to a training provider and like, yeah, so on and so forth. Yeah,
yeah, and they actually have good labs now.
yeah,
The labs in the early days was like a bit of hit and miss, but yeah, like I think the labs now are actually so much better. You actually get to get your hands on certain things. You kind of spend a bit of time just learning the concepts and then do a lab and then move on to the next topic. learn the theory and then do a lab. So I think it's actually really
Yeah.
quite helpful and made it more fun as well, rather
Mhm.
than just studying
Yeah,
series,
yeah.
repeating.
Speaking
Yeah.
speaking of labs, something I actually haven't put my headspace in is the applied certifications, right? There's the applied certifications wherein like you go into a lab, like you have to fulfill this, and that. And I think there are a couple of fabric certifications, applied certifications out there as well. Um,
Uh,
yeah, like I think that's also a good way to be more hands-on with things. Yeah, I guess
okay.
that's also good.
Hmm. Yeah, I haven't really looked into that one. Applied certifications, did you say?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's applied. Yeah. But I guess the thing is, it's not proctored, it's self-paced, and it's like you're in the VM, you're reading a material, and like so on and so forth. But like in a way, I kind of like exams because it's proctored and you kind of feel the pressure as well. Like it's a good type of pressure, like and that's what makes it really interesting and makes you invested in the first place, right? Like because you care about it, you don't want to fail, you don't want to fail. um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So when do you think so currently DP-700 is in beta, so it's not available for
Oh,
to
it's
to
gonna be
take.
available, right? It's just that I guess the reason why it's beta is because they might change some questions, which they do anyway, like every quarter or so, right? Um,
Mm-mm.
like there's probably not much material out there to cover that as well. And yeah, the MCT materials is also probably in development at the moment, right? Yeah, so I think it's really around that. But in terms of like the objective of the exam, I think it's pretty solid already, and I think there's already a clear goal of why that exam exists or what's the purpose of that exam.
Cool. Yeah. So when do you think it will be out of beta? Like, so the MCT
So
training will
if
be
you
will
look
be
at
ready.
DP-600, right? I think DP-600 was also beta at around that time, right? Or maybe earlier, maybe
Hmm.
September, right? And then it
Yeah.
was like GA around March-ish.
Okay.
So yeah, like
So
look,
sometime next year, this will be
sometime next year.
available.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Cool. Do you think there will be another data science, fabric data science
I
one
think so. Yeah.
after this
Yeah. That's a good question,
DP-800?
right? Yeah, maybe a DP-800, right? Well, I think so. There will be, but again, you just have to follow what's in the platform around, right? So there's a Azure Data Science Engineering. So that's why it kind of makes sense. Maybe there will be a Fabric Data Science Engineering as well, right? And if you look at Azure as well, there's an Azure Networking Engineering, but because there's no networking in Fabric, maybe that's more around like I
Hmm.
don't know, governance and IT administration, and so on. Yeah, like that's just how I see it, right? Like it just spreads out, like how the database exams was evolving, right? Like back then, it started with
Yeah.
SQL Server, and then it's split to multiple SQL Server exams, and then I don't know what's the exam now on SQL Server. I haven't followed, but in the Azure data side, like they now made it separate around Cosmos DB and data Azure. There's also a separate one that's more around lift and shift and like infra. So yeah,
Hmm.
like it's progressing throughout the time as well, like depending on how the industry behaves.
Do you think like fabric data security is kind of a big enough area to have its own certifications, or do you think it's gonna be
Mm.
bundled into some other?
I think it's gonna be bumped over to something more around like the whole security itself, like probably around Defender. So it's more probably like Defender or Defender plus Copilot plus something, right? uh,
Okay.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's also my thinking as well with Fabric with data science. Maybe there won't be a data science Fabric exam. The AI 102, which the AI engineer will probably just have Fabric component, right?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Sure. Yeah. It's kind of, yeah, you might get rebranded a little bit, change the current content because the data science space may not have changed that much. There's still a fair bit happening in
yeah,
the
it's still
Azure.
Azure ML, right?
Yeah,
Most of
yeah.
it is still Azure ML. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
Cool. Oh wow. Well, interesting. No, thanks for sharing the beta news about DP-700, and I think more broadly, why take exams, what's the
yeah.
benefit, and then it's up to the individuals to actually see whether it's the good thing for them at where they are with their career as well. So yeah, no, thanks for that. And anything else you wanna add?
Uh, no, I think that's good for now. And I'll just if I pass the DP 700 in a month's time, it's gonna be good, right? But if not, then we'll just try again. Keep on trying, right?
Yeah, if you fail, let us know as well. We'll have an episode about
Yeah.
about your
Yes.
failure. That should
Yeah.
drive you. That should drive you to start study harder.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Or make
Awesome.
excuses on why I didn't pass, right?
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Cool. Cool. Great.
Cool.
Well,
All right.
thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoy the content. We'll see you in the next video.
All right. See ya. Bye bye.